hate to do that, but I will now interrupt your conversations at the table, and we will start the reporting process. My only request to you, since we have many tables, is if you can get your report from your table's discussion as crisp as possible, but at the same time, remember that we don't want to lose some of the inputs that you have, so it is a balance to be achieved between being crisp but not missing important points. So, who is the first volunteer from the first table? Okay. You will have a mic in 1 second. Are we getting the mic? The lady here in green.
Hello?
Yes, yes, it works. Please.
Okay, I'm the first. My name's Radhika Shapurji. I head up a public relations firm. So they all said, my colleagues over here for today, said you're the rapporteur. I sat with a very interesting group. I have different countries: South Africa, Japan, India, China, Madagascar. Was a small voice, but was there. And you know what was so interesting was at the heart of the biggest challenge was that there seems to be a trust deficit at many levels. A trust deficit between India and China, between the way the countries behave, act, and how they perceive each other. There's a trust deficit within India between big government, industry, civil society, media. In all of this, as you very nicely put it, you have an economic, political, and societal issues which surround this trust deficit. So the heart of what we described was an emotional state of mind where fear is what, if we behave from a position of fear, where are we going to take the action? The second point that came through is that specifically this will work at two levels. It's at a global level, it's at a local level. At a global level, I think there was a very interesting frame of reference to say that eventually, though we are all competitive as countries, we need to create a framework today to be collaborative. Because the fact of the matter is that competition died a little while ago, whereas today the challenges that are faced across the developing and the developed countries are more or less the same. And if everybody is going to work from their vested agendas, it simply is not going to work very well today. So I think the fact that we need to have a globally collaborative framework where the rules of engagement are going to keep in mind the diversity, the differentiation, the fact that you have democracies and there are countries who don't have it. How do we still work together? Because the issues are more or less the same. The third point which came out, again, right across was, as you had mentioned, which is inequality. Everybody knows that there is inequality, but what are we really truly doing? What are we really doing about it? So from an India perspective, you have 6%, 7%, 5%, or for that matter, across different countries, you have the same single-digit movements ahead. However, the fact is inequality and the Gini quotient has gone up across all countries, and nobody is really, so economic policy, political agendas is something that is not driving to really address this issue. Do people really care about it at the leadership levels? Was a question that certainly went around the table. So with so many elephants and monkeys in the room, how is everybody going to work together? If there is anything that has created this trust deficit, which again went around, was that there's a lack of leadership. a lack of leadership at a global level, at a lack of leadership at a local level. And the fact is today we are all sitting here as leaders discussing this. So I have a student in my table who said, I'm really looking forward to what is the conversation, what is the debate, what is the dialogue that is going to happen here and going forward to change this status quo of having a trust deficit where leaders don't really want to act. The fact is all leaders know what needs to be done. Now the point is, will we do what needs to be done? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a very good start. Thank you. The next volunteer, Clyde.
Thank you. I'm Clyde Prestowitz from the Economic Strategy Institute in Washington, D.C., and we had a table here representing Africa, Asia, Europe, and the U.S., so a very global table. Claude, we started with your suggested categories, but then added to them. And so in addition to your suggestions about economic policy, politics, corporate governance, and social issues, we added demographics, national security. Particularly, we added demographics because it's a factor in most of the developing countries, except possibly India, that all of the societies are aging. Particularly, China is beginning to age rapidly. China's workforce is now shrinking, and this is true pretty much throughout the developing world as well as the developed world. This struck us particularly in thinking about the dynamics of the developing world. We raised the question at the table, how much of this is really all about China? It's the demand in China that drives growth in Brazil, for example, that drives growth in Southeast Asia. If China is aging and going to become old before it becomes rich, what are the implications of that for development in the rest of the developing world? That we thought was a major issue. Second element, national security. It has been said many times. There's been kind of a saying that globalization will make countries rich. Being rich, they'll become democratic. Being democratic, they'll be peaceful. But in fact, we've seen many examples where countries get rich, and because they get rich, they're able to act on old issues, on old complaints, and in fact, the peace gets tested rather than becoming solidified. Then another interesting issue came up dealing with the nature of capitalism, the nature of corporations, pointing out that in the developing world, many of the major businesses are family-owned businesses, or many of them are state-owned or quasi-state-owned. They're state-allied. And so that much of the analysis and the thinking about corporate governance and about market activity that we've all learned over our careers may have to be relearned in the light of an entirely new kind of corporate organization and corporate governance, and particularly the issue was raised at our table as to whether these powerful corporate entities, quasi-state, quasi-corporate entities, are more powerful than governments, and what the implications of that are, both for society and for government organization. In terms of government organization, we had one final point, which was that one of our members here raised the point that in countries that seem to grow rapidly, the political parties seem to be fewer. And so the question was raised, would China have been able to grow as rapidly as it has if it had 40 parties, 40 political parties? And we had a debate back and forth about that at our table. Some people said, well, wait a minute, can China continue to grow rapidly if it has only one party? And then the argument was made that India is growing rapidly and it has more and more parties. So we didn't resolve it, but we did raise the question of whether economic development drives a society toward a different kind of political, particularly democratic organization. And so we hope that's enough to keep you busy for the next couple of days.
Thanks, Clyde. The next, please, sir.
This table, we introduced ourselves. That took some time. Then we decided to see the three buckets and decided that are they the right way to look at the problem, or do we want to see what's really the need of the hour? So as we went on discussing, we said one of the critical themes around which everything is going to play out is innovation, and how are you going to bring the appropriate innovation in the emerging economies and then trying to share it. When I say innovation which is appropriate, we are essentially talking about scale and deployment at a scale level which is not replicable in terms of learnings from other parts of the world. Integration using technology is a core competence which exists in this part of the world, but then the base technology is how the government has to step in, which was the model where the government and the private sector played a very critical role in the Western economies. We need to look at that very deeply. The social issues in terms of access and affordability and reaching everybody, how do you bring the productivity at the base level was another theme which was discussed at length. If you don't improve the productivity at the base level, whether they are in agriculture or any of the other segments, moving them to the other sectors, whether they are the manufacturing or the services sectors, would be difficult, and that's an absolute must as we try to create more jobs, which is very critical. Any growth that happens has to have a component of job enablement through the skills, and that's been very, very fundamental requirement. Even if you look at the Western countries, the thrust today is on the SME segment, where the job creation in the SME segment or the entrepreneurial opportunities would be created, and that's going to be a global phenomena, more so in our part of the world. Finally, the productivity was discussed at length, but then the sharing of the best practices between the BRICS countries and BRICS with the other parts of the world was another theme which we debated, and we must continuously keep that in mind. Finally, on the political governance, we decided not to talk about it because none of us want to get into politics.
Okay, sir.
This is Manoharan representing this table. We have at this table India, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho. And the pool of ideas that have come across, I'm trying to summarize within the few minutes allotted. As far as the economic policies bucket is concerned, we have 3 points. The first one is all these emerging economies should prioritize in terms of infrastructure development. And compared to the developed economies, where there seems to be a lot of pre-project planning and effective implementation without cost overrun, these emerging economies suffer out of time overrun coupled with cost overrun. So resources are getting wasted because of this. The second aspect is with reference to the prioritization of the sectorial development. We find that developed economies have based their growth primarily on manufacture, then agriculture, then service sector, whereas many of the emerging economies, at least barring China, if you talk of India, we are focused more on service sector, least on manufacturing and agriculture. When you are focusing on service sector, what happens is the prosperity does not percolate down to the masses or the working class. It is limited to the creamy layer of the society, and that creates the gap between the rich and the poor. So right thing to do is to have a balancing balanced growth between manufacture, agriculture, and service sector in such a way that the prosperity percolates down the line to the masses. And the third point on the economic front is the legal environment should be appropriate for global investment to flow into emerging economies, because there are bottlenecks in terms of approvals, acquisition, land acquisition, coal import, so many things, regulations, over-regulations. So this is the third point. On social issues, urbanization has been a major issue as far as emerging economies are concerned. While the majority of the population lives in rural area, the amenities are available only in urban areas. Therefore, these urban areas are getting choked with migration from rural to urban. Whereas the ideal thing that should happen is to empower the rural areas with all the amenities which urban possesses, so that this migration is stopped and all the rural geographical locations of emerging economies grow in a comparative manner. The second point on social issue is with regard to what Mr. Ramadurai also touched upon, skill development. In today's environment scenario for emerging economies, unemployment is not the problem. There are enough number of jobs and opportunities. There are enough number of youth. The problem is the skill sets that are required by the market are not possessed by this youth. So therefore, there has to be a paradigm shift in the education system and also empowering the youth with the skill sets which the market demands, so that the gap between skill sets and knowledge which they possess and the demand of the market vanishes and they become employable. And the third point on social front is the health for all. The hygiene, nutrition, and so on and so forth, all these things should also be focused. On the political governance, again, 3 quick points. First one is how the emerging economies are, political governance is utilizing the taxpayers' money. Many times we find this is used for freebies and it is given as under some populistic schemes. So that should be curtailed. In fact, there is a scheme where you give guarantee, employment guarantee scheme. And a lot of money is spent on that, but for unproductive work. Rather, it would be ideal for the political governors to think of aligning with the entrepreneurs in subsidizing the salaries, so that the entrepreneur will ensure that there is productive job and taxpayers' money is effectively used. Second one is on the environment protection. So political governance should ensure that growth should be associated with, there is a concept of triple bottom line that is evolving, that has evolved in developed economies. One is on economic, social, and environmental. So all these things should be preserved, so that the scenario emerges in such a way it is not cradle to grave, it is cradle to crad, recycling all those things. So these thoughts have to be focused. And the last point, of course, you also mentioned about it, the issues of accountability, transparency, and elimination of corruption in the system. Because most of all these emerging economies have excellent people, enormous resources. What we need is leadership with commitment, vision, and integrity. What we need is economics in politics and not politics in economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chen Yang. Here it is.
Thank you very much. My name is Chen Yang from China. Our table was blessed with representatives from Fiji, Mongolia, India, Kuwait, and China, finally. We made a few observations, and we also tried to come up with some solutions that we can think of. So here's what we summarized. We noticed a number of issues, common challenges that all of us face, specifically some in governance, in corruption, in bureaucracy, also in social issues, such as the issues faced by the urban and rural poor. Also, how do their problems tie in with the middle class? Is the middle class happy? Little do we need to say, there are also economics and financial issues that we all face. So to summarize what we found out, let me start with social challenges. One thing that we noticed is all of our countries are trying to deal with the urban and the rural poor, as well as sometimes an unhappy middle class. What China is doing, that we realize, is that they're trying to deal with the migrant worker issue. Every year, there are tons and thousands and millions of migrant workers that move back and forth from first-year, second-year cities back to their home country, home provinces and back. A lot of times, their education, their children's education is not taken care of. Healthcare is a problem, and specifically, China has this issue called hukou, which is a quote-unquote domestic passport that you must have in order to actually have social security and healthcare. So looking forward to what the new government would come up with, hopefully there will be solutions in that aspect. For all of our countries, we see social issues in healthcare, in housing, affordable housing, and we're all looking forward to seeing improvements in these areas. We had a lengthy discussion on political reform. Specifically for India, a lot of us are hoping to see the empowerment of a new generation of leaders, younger leaders. There was a lot of comments on the geriatrics that are in power, and why not have younger leaders that can speak for themselves. And also, we noticed that a lot of us would like to see more transparency in the elections, whether it's at a central level or a provincial, local level. Another thing that we would like to see is that to have more independence. We use the word independence rather than strengthening of the judicial system and also the police system. Those are very specific comments we came up with. And for China, being the only representative from China, personally, I would like to see more stability within reform. We do not want to see instability for a massive country such as China, but reform is very much needed in the political system. So that is a challenge for China. Finally, we made some comments in the economic system as well. After all, the growth net is an economic forum, as Mr. Smadja has often told us that we should focus on. One specific observation we had was in financial markets. And in fact, we came up with a comment where we'd like to see more of a democracy, a democratizing of capital. And that should boost growth and improve exchange amongst the countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chen. This was quite substantive. Tim Stratford.
Thank you. I'm Tim Stratford from the Beijing office of Covington and Burling. At our table, we had representatives from India, China, and the United States. We started out by talking about the fact that, as Claude had mentioned earlier, the world is changing, and there's a need for countries to come to grips with this. And we talked about the fact that there are a lot of different players in each country. Not only are there government leaders and there are the grassroots, you have people who are in corporations, you have people who are in think tanks, and people are looking at these issues from very different perspectives. And then you have relations between different countries, and they're looking at things from different perspectives. So the question is, how can you look at a particular issue and arrive at a consensus when people are looking at it from so many different vantage points and perspectives? And we thought at our table that if we first try to set aside our own individual roles and look from an economic analysis perspective, what would lead to the greatest growth, that once we could agree on that, then it would be easier to then talk about the politics of that and what different people's responsibilities and benefits would be. But a starting point is, what is the most effective economic policy? We talked about the fact that, in fact, at present, different individuals and different countries have very different economic models, and they disagree about some very fundamental questions about what's in their own best interests. And so until we can make more progress in that area, it's very difficult to see how we can sit down and reach agreement on broader things. But in fact, it is important to reach agreement on broader things. There have to be certain rules that people are operating under, or we can't have the confidence that we need to collaborate. We talked one example of an issue very current right now is concern about cybersecurity. The fact that the global internet doesn't really have rules that people have to sign up to. There aren't any ways to really hold people accountable for their conduct in certain respects, and you know, how is the global community going to deal with that? Finally, we also talked about demographics as a challenge. At our table, we have India, which is concerned about a growing population. We have China, which is concerned about the workforce starting to diminish. I helpfully suggested that perhaps the young Indians could support the retirees in China, but somehow this suggestion was not accepted.
Thank you, Tim. Here, sir.
My name is Ingo Ploger. I'm Brazilian citizen, and we have a very interesting table. Mostly of us are from Latin America, from Mexico to Uruguay, and we have also a representative of Africa, of Tanzania and India, and we incorporate in the Latin America also Spain. The first great issue that we were discussing is about what is a challenge for everybody of us in the three baskets that you defined. The major challenge is to manage the contradictions. In the international field, the alignment of global policies, the necessity to have global policies, and on the other hand, to have consistent national policies. Here we have a contradiction. One example is about the financial system, where you need a global agreement, but you have national policies that have difference to give sovereignty to other institutions. You see the same discussion in the moment in Europe. And you see the same discussion in the moment in the WTO. So alignment of international policies, a necessity for solidarity, and the contradiction to national policies. Getting to the three baskets on policies, one contradiction is the time frame. We have a time frame in the policies and democracies looking for elections. So the time frame is 4 years, maybe 6. And after election, the time is running out. So all the decisions are less than that time. And in our corporates, it's not different. We look off the quarter results, and we have to respond about difference between that. So long-term and short-term policies are in a contradiction in our open societies. And when we look in the policy framework, everybody now is looking for the middle class. The developing countries are losing middle class. That's a discussion in the US, that's a discussion in Europe, that's a discussion in Japan. And in the developing countries, we are gaining middle class. So we have a different kind of situation and policies. That's another contradiction. The countries who are losing middle class, of course, they want to protect them more. And others who are gaining it, they want to gain it in a better shape. If we get to the social basket, the major issue in the moment is inequality. Inequality in the global sense is getting better, but in a more sense of the countries is getting worse. That we see in US, we see in Europe, we see it especially in Spain and Italy, we see it also in other countries, and in Latin America we see a gain, because there was a model for social insertion that's quite different. It's not top-down, but it's bottom-up. And this social insertion situation brings from the poorest people in a middle class. And in the economy, the framework for investment is the target for everyone. Everyone wants to catch the investor. Everyone is looking about the investor and see how can I put the investor in my country, in my state or in my municipality. That's the name of the game. So the first target of that are the great companies, our multis, and also our multis in the international field. They are investing in other countries, so we are looking from them too. But the most important employer is not the global multinational, but are the small and medium enterprises. And in our country, small and medium enterprises employs more than 80%, 90% in some cases. So that's a national policy. And when we catch the investor, we have to be competitive and want to look our investment policies as a framework to be competitive with others. That's another contradiction. So we live in the contradictions, but all of that has very few effect if we don't look for the major basis to improve small and medium enterprises, to improve the issue of inequality, social insertion, and the right policy as education, 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 and education. And the education begins by 0 to 6, and that's a policy where we maybe international-wide do too less and too not so far, because policies are making more from 6 years to 25 years or something like that. But from 0 to 6, the policies are very weak. And in our countries, in the developing countries, we have to recover that kind of policy making. And that needs leadership with visions. And it's not only leadership with visions in the international field, but especially leadership in the framework that we are talking about in the national side and also in the municipality. So the challenge to manage the contradictions began on our table because we have a very strong leadership from the Mexican side, and then 5 minutes before the end, they give me, to me the leadership, and I have to manage now the difficulties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Obviously, you manage them well. So let us go to this table here. Can we get a mic to the table up front? Here, sorry, we go here. Here it is, sir.
Professor Bing Xiang from Beijing. I'm very privileged to represent this group, and a very diverse group. We have representation from India, from Africa, from Japan, from mainland China, from Hong Kong, from US. And the only drawback of this group is that we have too many professors, you know. 1, 2, 3, 3 of us, you know, so selecting me to represent this group. We had a good discussion on the 3 issues you assigned to us. And the first one on the political governance. And, you know, a person from China, we look at the history of China, we had 5 major dynasties, roughly every 300 years a cycle. So the money and the power go together until we had a Big Bang. And if you look at history around the world, you don't have so many dynasties that's lasting longer than 300 years, you know. If you view Europe as a single country, you know, I mean, you guys have been fighting until 1945. You know, the U.S. is only 236 years old, but U.S. Gini coefficient is already 0.475. That's what I'm saying here. You know, so the money and the power go together is the structure problem. And if you look at the Western democracies, and number one, national debt problem, it seems like difficult to solve that problem within democracy. You know, you see the development in Spain, Italy. I'm not so optimistic, you know. And secondly, the myopia is really a system problem now, as well in China, not only in Western democracies, you know. And thirdly, it seems like Western democracy may have difficulty attracting the top talents. You know, at least the elites may not go to serve in government. You know, they will become doctors, lawyers, become billionaires in Silicon Valley. You know, going to Washington, D.C. may not be the top choice for the top graduates, you know. And you know, lastly, the Gini coefficient that represented by U.S. is getting really serious. in the case of China, we have some positive elements like ruling by elites, even according to our EMBA, 5%, at least buys the sample, 5% of EMBA students are government officers, about 50-some% from private sector, SOE multinational. I think it's fair to say the EMBA's government officers represent the best of what we have, despite the fact we have the best businessmen in China already attending our program, you know. So this is number one. Number two, the promotion through ranks is another advantage. You have to be a district manager first, become mayor of Beijing or vice mayor of Beijing, then state governor of poorest province of China, richest province of China, serving 2 ministries, then become vice prime minister, blah, blah, blah. You know, you have to step by step, you know. So the two positive elements. But of course, structure problem remains. You know, I mean, we do not have a powerful system to mitigate the power of government. So, you know, the money and power tend to go together. So that structure problem is still there. So we're in the process looking for maybe the next generation relation between the state and business, you know, that can combine the strength of the Western system and the beauty of Confucius system. And I hope, so this is on the political front. On the economic front, I think the major concern is income wealth inequality. It's also the case in China. And if you look at the data from Chinese government, from World Bank, I think maybe the Gini coefficient in China is probably higher than 0.5. And then according to some of the studies, not only from our school, but also from other sister schools in China. And this problem is going to be so difficult to deal with because if you look at the first level wealth distribution, one entrepreneur creating the big company, usually maybe 90% of total wealth is allocated to that particular entrepreneur. 10% remaining is shared by 200,000 employees. So the inequality already arrived at the very beginning. So taxation will not help very much. If you tax me 50%, 55%, if I get a 90% $100, it will not help very much. And also the culture of giving is very weak. If you look at 3 levels of redistribution of wealth, we're extremely weak in every level. It's going to be a very daunting task for us to deal with. And especially for America, with such a mature institution having that level of difficulty, I think for China it could be difficult. I presume this may be the case in India and Brazil as well. But recently Brazil did well. I see your Gini coefficient coming down from 0.6 to 0.5. So we sent a group to be there to study, you know, figure out what you guys did, you know. So this is, to us, it's most serious economic challenge for many countries. The last issue, and the social issue, you know, we would like to see more roles of NGOs to play in countries like China. And also another issue brought up by a member of the group is really this trust deficit, as mentioned by some other groups, you know. And this trust between China, US, maybe China, India. And one recommendation would be get China, Japan, India, and the US together and sit on the table, talk face to face to deal with the trust deficit issue. Put everything on the table, you know. I think it's really, because if it's too much lack of trust, and then there's going to be a possibility of many unnecessary conflicts or frictions. No good for nobody, you know. I think this issue become more and more important, you know. So this has a profound implication for global governance as well. So I hope I have not missed out some of the key remarks from the group. All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have time to take 2 more tables reports, so I will go there. Sir.
Thank you. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I run an independent think tank in Delhi called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I won't say that we had citizens of different countries. I will say we had residents of different countries at our table. And we had residents from Liberia, Oman, Poland, Switzerland, India, the United States, and even airports. In a sense, that captures the fact that there's this new constellation of growth in the global economy. So when we went through your 3 top buckets of issues, we identified governance, going beyond just corporate governance. We identified governance as something that covered all of our agendas, irrespective of where we were resident. When we went through the issues that people were highlighting, I'd like to present it in terms of a balance sheet. And let's start with the bad news, the liabilities, and then we'll talk about the assets. Some of these have been already discussed, so I don't need to dwell on them. But number 1 on the liability side was the concern about inclusion. And it's something that has come up several times in the conversation already. But stemming from that inclusion are other things that also stack up the liabilities side. Another major area was energy and resources. And why is that important? It's because if you look at emerging market economies or even other poorer countries, the per capita consumption of energy and resources is still several-fold lower than that of developed economies. So if you have to think about inclusion, those energy and resources have to be given to people. And at the same time, that raises questions about energy security, resource security, and of course, environmental sustainability. A third liability, again, which has been talked about, was skills and employment. And again, this is the classic divide between whether you think of it as an asset or you think of it as a liability. But at least with the lens of inclusion, it currently sits on the liability side. A fourth area which has not been talked about enough, but we did dwell on it at our table, was the role of technology. And some of us felt that technology as it was currently developed or deployed was actually widening gaps rather than narrowing them. We were developing games and cell phones faster than we were solving problems that confronted many of these economies. And at the same time, to the extent technology was being adopted, there was a lot of copy and paste. So if emerging market economies have to go onto a different trajectory and continue driving this new constellation of growth, then a new technological innovation ecosystem has to develop. And finally, something we did not touch upon enough, although it does relate, is the role of finance, not just for big infrastructure needs, which are important, but also for small businesses, for small business solutions, for decentralized solutions, and so forth. So how do you take big finance and link it to this range of activities going on the ground? Very quickly, the good news, the assets. Number 1, something we felt was common across a lot of the emerging economies was nothing's too difficult to do. And that was not an ideology. It was a representation or a manifestation of what we witness around us. And as a result, we see that, number 2, that companies from emerging market economies are not shy in seeking market share in each other's economies as well as in the developed world. They were aggressive to do that. And number 3, what drives that is their ability to operate in very difficult environments, because those are the environments in which these companies have evolved. If they've evolved in China, if they've evolved in Mexico, if they've evolved in India, in the difficult environments, they're also able to move into new, difficult, but opportunistic environments. Number 4, what's driving them is, and related to the technology point I raised earlier, is this trend towards frugal innovation. There is a trend, there is a drive, and perhaps it requires more support. And finally, back to the issue of inclusion, there are positive signs as well. We heard about the Social Development Fund in Liberia. We know of efforts to broaden the social safety net in India. We know of the successes in Brazil. So while inclusion is the top concern on the liability side, it's also there are signs that on the asset side there is progress that perhaps requires more momentum. Thank you.
Thank you. One last table report here. Madam?
This could best be called as the South Asia table. We have across the table 3 representatives, including the president of the India-Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, 3 representatives from the IBCCI. We have the president of Intel. We have an associate from HSA Advocates. We had a sitting member of parliament who had to leave on account of a TV session. And we have Mr. Suresh Prabhu, who's been former union minister with 7 portfolios and 4 times member of parliament, and currently engaged with 150 organizations. I wish to say that given this backdrop, our discussion was fairly focused. We began with the view that all emerging economies are looking for transparent and investor-friendly policies. This has tended to happen in the region, but in fits and starts, and inconsistent across time and regions. On governance issues, we began by saying that all politics is local politics, and all economics needs to address this by adopting appropriate strategies. In the South Asian perspective, at all times, policy needs to be tailored or directed in accordance with stated objectives and not remain mired in 1 or 2 commas. Example from Bangladesh I'd like to take first, on our guests from across the border. For instance, Bangladesh has made rapid strides and overtaken India in the production of, let's say, ready-made garments, because their policies were tailored for it. No taxes levied, easy loans, 27 million workforce, 80% women, on an average income of $80 per month. Microcredit in Bangladesh, once again, has given, and given only to women, has empowered women who also, like India, get elected at village levels in local governments. Across India, I'm just talking in the context, since we stress this on account of recently International Women's Day. Our self-help groups is a rapidly growing movement, but needs to be carried to the next level, and this is where governance comes in. We're hoping in India, for example, that ICT will take this forward. ICT results in social and political empowerment. Examples. The Arab Spring, among other things, is a great social equalizer. Now, the ICT, we are hoping, while the state is assisting and adding to infrastructure, but we need to focus both on content as well as on devices. Coming to the economic and sociological ecosystem, there are huge challenges. India is now already 1/3 urban, while 25 years ago, we were barely 12 to 15% urban. Now, what is happening, and which we are all witnessing, is that norms and mores are out of sync with what urban India wants. In 15 years, we will be 50% urban, which is normally considered as a tipping point. India's youth wants more in a shorter time and are demanding, on every count, a fairer society and a more just dispensation. Bangladesh, I just thought we'd mention, is at the moment tending to look as somewhat politically fragmented. Currently, as of this week, shall we say, growing more and more polarized, pro-liberation, anti-liberation, the Shahbag Square. I've just come back from there, so I shared with colleagues across the table, what I witnessed there. There are protection committees appointed by both sides in all mohallas, and there's an apprehension that this could escalate. Coming to the MNCs, I think the main point that we wanted to stress here is, while we applaud the MNCs of South Asia, and India contributes significantly to global MNCs from South Asia, Tatas and Birlas are visible across most continents. The South Asian MNC will carry with it the new cultural values and will take across the Asian management style. Maybe initially a number of these were family controlled, but these are getting more and more professionalized. But the point here is that we now need new regulatory frameworks across all sectors. We need to involve all stakeholders, possibly through IT, with mandatory disclosure systems, massive skill building efforts to involve everyone, and literacy for every man, woman, and child to begin at household levels, to be enrolled at all times in some skill building, some education, some health initiative to close the gap. If not, we will witness as we saw, the financial crisis of 2008-2011, Egypt and Tunisia, local unrest. And therefore, we need to align policy and program to the growing voices surrounding us. Thank you.
Thank you. You have seen appearing on the screen some of the elements coming out of your input from the discussions at the table, and we will have these elements distributed at some stage. What I would like to do here is not to try to summarize, because you got these elements appearing on the screen from time to time, and we have your notes. But let me tell you what struck me. In fact, there are 4 elements which I would like to take from your discussions. Number 1, when we speak about trust deficit, when we speak about how to make national norms correspond with global norms, when we speak about having different cultures and different perspectives coming together to create a consensus, for me, it points out to a very important problem that, in a way, in the last 20 years, we have built, to some extent, the hardware of globalization. Companies moving operation here and there, trade expanding, etc., etc. Where we are lagging behind is creating the software of globalization. How having different systems, different modus operandi, in a way connect with each other and being able to work with each other in a good, efficient, smooth way. So in a way creating the software of globalization. And this also touch the trust deficit issues that has been mentioned quite a few times. The second point that struck me is how present the issue of how do you use GDP growth is becoming very important. To some extent, I think your feedback and what we see in your different countries is that the era of what I would call blind growth, growth for having 8% instead of 6% growth, this era is almost coming to an end. It is mitigated by the quality of growth, whether you create inclusive growth, whether you create more equality between rural and urban areas, between those who possess the knowledge and those who are slower in acquiring the knowledge, etc., etc. But this notion of how do you create, in a way, smart growth, taking into account the need to reduce and manage the wealth distribution issue, I think it's very important and has come out very strongly in your point. Third point, very rapidly, the point of technology and innovation, and how do you create this new ecosystem for innovation? How do you make sure that, in a way, technology doesn't aggravate the divide? How do you avoid creating a digital divide? And how do you get into, and this was referred to this notion which is more adapted to many countries, this notion of frugal innovation. And I think here there is a lot to be done, and there are a lot of capabilities in a way to be leveraged because the potential exists today in many countries in emerging markets. And last but not least, a lot of what you have been referring to, and the word has come many times, are issues related of quality of leadership. I think this is today maybe the one missing element that we see in so many countries. Quality of leadership, because it is only through this quality of leadership that in a way you have issues like inclusive growth, that you have issues like trust being addressed, like you have issues of smart development policies that are being addressed. So this issue of leadership and governance has come out very strongly in what you have said, but it is also, I think, a notion of the greater awareness today that we see in many countries. And in fact, it is a very optimistic sign that should give us some reasons for hope in the coming years. For instance, what we see in some countries in Africa today. So I would like to conclude here this session. We will use your input. We will integrate that in the session. We will have a list of the points that you have developed. Now I would like to invite you for some refreshments. I am told that you are deprived of refreshments. Okay, so I hope the record will show that I am not responsible for that. So I am told in no ambiguous term, no tea break. So please stay in your seats. As I said, I decline any responsibility for that. I want to remain your friends. She's the one who is the culprit.